presentar a quien hoy nos va a exponer. En primer lugar, quiero decir que estoy muy contenta de presentar a una mujer que está liderando en ciberseguridad, en inteligencia artificial, cuando muchas veces este es un ámbito más masculino, pero sí hay mujeres que están avanzando en este tremendo camino. Hoy les quiero contar que ella tiene 25 años de experiencia en ciberseguridad, en redes, en informática y en ciencia de datos, data science, tan importante. Además, ha trabajado en el gobierno federal de Estados Unidos e instituciones privadas, públicas, con las soluciones de ciberseguridad y ciencia de datos. Es reconocida por su expertise en inteligencia de amenazas cibernéticas, ciencia de datos, aprendizaje automático, inteligencia artificial, soluciones de defensa en profundidad, y su visión de liderazgo sin duda ha sido muy importante para llevar a cabo estrategias innovadoras, efectivas en el mundo y a través también de su trabajo en Estados Unidos, porque ella es la vicepresidenta de estrategia en ciberseguridad de Darktrace, que es nuestro auspiciador. Le damos un tremendo aplauso a NICOLE CARIGNAN.
Thank you for having me. This is wonderful. I appreciate being down here, especially with what ELIAC is doing. It's bringing together cybersecurity leaders to adopt AI rapidly, quickly, but safely and securely. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how the AI landscape has changed in the last year and a half and what we should be thinking about as we look to the future and work together. So about 18 months ago, publicly available generative AI hit the scene. These are large language models. I will be as specific as possible when I talk about AI, because when I talk about AI, it's not all generative AI. So I will try to be as specific as possible so that we know exactly what we're talking about. But 18 months ago, publicly available large language model, text-based large language models, generative AI hit the scene. What this did was it revolutionized the way humans interacted with AI. They now have the capability to change their data experience with natural language. So obviously a huge appetite to adopt because we can now interface with it within our own language. But it is a very finite specific use case, and also too, we have to understand how to harness it safely and securely. Because the initial models, even though generative AI has been around for about 10 years, but the initial publicly available models hit the scene with very little security wrapped around them and no data integrity. As a result, we saw the rise of hallucinations, but that was really just inaccuracies in the machine learning world. But the lack of security around them actually caused a very easy soft target. So in the last year and a half, we've seen the rise of adversarial machine learning. That's the attacking of machine learning models themselves. We are now expanding our attack surface and giving new vehicles for targets. And let's be real, they were pretty soft targets in the beginning. They're a little bit still soft right now. So the security community is rapidly trying to lock this down, secure it as quickly as possible so that those don't become another vulnerability within our tech stack. With jailbroken large language models, adversaries started innovating with autonomous agents. Now, these are large language model-based autonomous agents. So last year, we saw the rise of Worm GPT, Hack GPT, Fraud GPT, and so forth. As you see here, they were pretty rudimentary in their decision-making. It didn't perform sophisticated tasks, but it did help with the surveillance aspect of the attack kill chain and just providing more productivity specifically with sophisticated phishing attacks. So the major impact of adversarial use of AI last year was on the inbox. One thing that we learned from that is humans can no longer be the last line of defense. Gone were the days of security awareness training where humans are expected to be able to spot the phishing attacks. We have to use much more sophisticated machine learning techniques to identify anomalous changes in trusted communicant partners so that we can detect these much more sophisticated phishing attacks. Also, we saw just the rapid adoption of adversarial use of AI, and they don't have the same level of trust, security, and safety that we need in order to adopt the same thing. So productivity gains. This past year, we saw the rise of the creation of new malware scripts. I want to make sure we're still on the same thing. Okay, the creation of new malware scripts. But in those malware scripts, we found package hallucinations. We found vulnerabilities. But adversaries don't care if they're interjecting vulnerabilities into their operations. They just want the productivity gain. And what does this mean? So they have malware-generated scripts. So we can no longer rely on traditional cyber threat intelligence like IOCs, signatures, and hashes of tools because adversaries don't have to use the same tool ever twice again. They can be one and done. And so we're starting to see a shift in our security to be able to defend against these types of attacks. Traditional security detection mechanisms are not going to suffice in this era. We saw the attacks of adversarial machine learning. Now they're not just attacking the prompt, which was an easy target, to be honest. It's an implicit confusion between the data and the control plane, and it's easily manipulatable no matter how many times we try to secure it. But they're looking at the APIs and the data corpuses themselves. Last couple months, deepfakes have been around for a while, but deepfakes have gotten a lot better. And so the same lesson we're learning last year, that humans can't be the last line of defense in the inbox, they can't be the last line of defense for the detection of deepfakes. With deepfakes, we're starting to see that they get so much better in the last 2 years, or last 2 months, I apologize. And the deepfakes are created by generative adversarial networks, GANs. But we can actually use machine learning to facilitate the detection of these much more sophisticated attacks or imagery or videos, specifically in the social engineering realm. You can use the discriminator network of the GANs. You can use recurrent neural networks or CNNs in order to look for patterns and changes, anomalies in facial or biological signal. So we're having to change the way we think of detection to find the right machine learning case that will help facilitate that specific objective. We've also seen a change in information warfare. Information warfare is not new, or content warfare is not new. Many countries this year are in election season. We're seeing a rise of disinformation campaigns. Deepfakes are a part of it. Just last month, the DOJ, or Department of Justice in the US, took down 968 social media accounts that were disseminating misinformation about the elections. It was an AI bot as well. So nothing new that we've seen, except for now we're seeing it in speed and scale. The NIH, the National Institute of Health in the US, just put out a study that when humans were told they would be presented with deepfake imagery, they still only had about a 50% accuracy of being able to tell if the image was a deepfake or real. There's a psychological impact, and that's really where we can't rely on humans to just be that detection capability. Vet and verify is always a good rule, but we need to arm ourselves with the right tools in order to facilitate those detections. Some countries, I would love to say it was in the US, but we are not one of them. Some countries this year are evaluating whether or not they should legislate or put regulations in place as to whether or not companies can pay ransoms. As a result, you're going to see the microeconomic ecosystem of financially motivated threat actor groups change. They're already diversifying their revenue streams. In our half-year threat report, we saw cybercrime as a service rise for the third year in a row, and it's one of the highest used of the tools that we observe. Malware as a service and ransomware as a service has continued to rise, but now we're seeing AI as a service. So for $45 a month, you can go on the dark web, have access to a jailbroken interface, create some malware scripts, constantly change your tooling, and it gives additional revenue streams to financially motivated threat actor groups so that they don't have to rely solely on the payment of ransoms. So let's look to what's next. Most of my career, I have been asked to, or paid to think like a criminal. So as we start to prepare for the defense of the next 12 months or the next year to 2 years, we look at what's going on in the research community. In the research community, we're seeing some benign research that if I were a very well-funded, financially motivated threat actor group or even a state-sponsored group, I could easily port some of this research to optimize my operations. And again, I don't have to have the level of accuracy that defenders need. If it helps me speed and scale, I can adopt it and use it, and then just bring in humans when we need to. So there was a University of Virginia study with 3 other international universities in January that started training their large language models on how to jailbreak large language models. So you're starting to see the training of AI to attack AI. Oh goodness, there we go. The prompt is obviously still a concern. We're starting to see more creative ways of being able to attack the prompt in large language models. Also, Rael Nayak just came out with some research this past year about how to increase multi-hop reasoning of autonomous agents to facilitate much more complex decision-making. If you pair that with the research that just came out 2 months ago about utilizing a team of finitely trained, specific objective autonomous agents to achieve an attack. In this particular case, it was a university team looking at how to exploit 0 days on the web services. They had a hierarchical planning agent, a managerial agent, as well as multiple specific function agents of different types of attacks that they can try. It only had about a 29 or 28%, 30% efficacy, but still, that's incredibly helpful. So to port that with more complex decision making, this is just going to augment attacks, and we're going to see a lot more speed. And this is important to defenders because we need to mitigate the amount of damage that can happen in an environment and reduce the amount of risk. So that means we have to be able to respond faster. We can't wait to let an entire attack progress throughout our environment. All right, so let's forget about threat actors for a little bit. Let's just talk about the adoption of AI. What does that mean for the people in this room? It's causing some pretty big gaps in security offerings across multiple tech stacks and security tools. For the most of our careers, we've been told you need to focus on getting best in breed for every specific domain and putting them all together, and don't put your eggs in one basket. But as a result, we've lacked visibility across multiple domains. We have a difficulty in performing cross-domain detection and response. Also, data is going to be the biggest issue in the next 2 years. So with the release of publicly available large language models that trained on the entire internet, everyone was like, no, don't use my data. We're locking down our data. So we have a dwindling data set. So now as a threat actor, which we've already seen over the last 3 years, IT is the most targeted sector because of the supply chain risk. If I can compromise one, I can compromise many. We saw over the past year the compromising of AI models, specifically large language models, in publicly available or open source interfaces like Hugging Face. If I can compromise one, I can compromise many. Now with a dwindling data set available for some of these much more computationally expensive models, if I can compromise the data provider, if I can interject what I want to achieve or manipulate the output, I can compromise many. So data supply chain risk is going to be a big concern over the next couple of years. I was at an AI conference in San Francisco a month and a half ago. The biggest theme that came out of that conference was a lack of adoption of AI because we didn't have the transparency, explainability, or understanding how the model came to its conclusion, so I can't productize it or operationalize that intelligence without that valuable knowledge. So that comes down to, now we need data forensics. Now we need to have an understanding of the underlying models. We need to understand feature importance and weights and understand how these models come to their conclusions so that we can operationalize that intelligence faster as our adversaries are invading. Okay, we're done with the doom and gloom, I promise. That's it. Threat intel briefing over. How do we get ahead? The first comes with complete visibility across your entire organization. That's cross-domain. That means either you're moving to a platform approach or you're working with tools and vendors that work well with others, that integrate well with others so that you have a better visibility across multiple different domains so that you can see the entire life cycle of an attack. Because attacks are not just to the inbox anymore. They're not just to a web service and ultimately trying to laterally move to a domain controller. An attack is going across email, network, identity, apps, SaaS, and potentially cloud, or even going into OT. Attacks are so much more complex, so it's important that we have that extended visibility, may it be through platform approach or it may be through really well-integrated tools. I talked about speed and scale. That's the first concern we have. Data, we can push that out for about a year. The first concern is speed and scale. So we need to be able to respond and contain an incident in machine speed so that we can buy defenders time to perform a more complete human investigation and remediation. But we need to be able to respond quicker so that we can reduce the amount of damage or risk to an organization. And we saw this in the IBM data breach report that just came out. The use of AI to facilitate that, to reduce the amount of damage of an actual incident, actually reduces your amount of risk as an organization completely. Not completely, a lot. Here's an example. Just, I guess now 3 months ago, we have a great integration with Palo Alto firewalls. If those of you who know Darktrace and are a Darktrace customer, we're never going to play in the firewall space, but we need to play well with all the other tools because it's important to have that data integration and visibility across your entire tech stack and security stack. We have a great integration with Palo Alto. Before the CVE disclosure at the end of March, we had 2 customers who we started to see anomalous activity on their firewalls. One of them was a public institution, and we started to see them call out to 2 anomalous or rare endpoint IPs with no domains or host names associated with them, and they started downloading shell scripts. This turned out, later we found out that these IPs are a part of their operational relay box network, which is a part of their C2. But this was obviously a very targeted attack because this was before the CVE disclosure was even announced. One of our customers actually went to Palo Alto and said, hey, what's going on? We're seeing this weird stuff on this device. Having that visibility across your tools is key and critical to understanding and being able to detect in real time. We had a State of Cyber AI report that came out in April. We queried about 2,000 security practitioners, multiple different levels across 14 different countries. And my whole background, as she mentioned, half my career has been in the cross-section of machine learning and cybersecurity, so I found this very interesting. 95% of them said, yes, AI is going to help us detect and respond. But then when you asked them, only 26% said that I can tell you the type of AI that's in the product, and I think it's just generative AI. And there's so many other machine learning applications, tools, techniques that can actually achieve much more accuracy than just generative AI. So I think it's important for all of your vendors, all of your tools to understand the machine learning underneath it, how it's coming to its conclusion, start to build that trusting relationship so that you can operationalize and productize that intelligence quickly. So let's talk about AI and cybersecurity. I'm going to start off with that first row up there. Before coming to Darktrace, that is actually where I spent most of my career in machine learning and security. That is what most of us in security have been doing with machine learning for the last 15 years. We've been sitting on a wealth of collaborative cyber threat intelligence, shared attack TTPs. Our entire community works together. We collaborate well with each other, and there's so much data out there. So we're saying, like, let's take this gold mine of data. Let's add a whole bunch of, I would work with 300 different cyber threat intelligence feeds. How do we facilitate attack path, like advanced threat hunting with machine learning? And we're in this case, most of your products are using supervised machine learning. These are classifiers trained by humans to be able to detect patterns in data that it's been specifically trained on. It does facilitate faster detection. It is limited, though, that it will only detect what it has been trained on. It is very finite in its training, and it has to be updated regularly because it's a static model when new data and new attack patterns have been identified. Let's go down to the bottom here. Let's talk about generative AI and the SOC. There's some really interesting use cases that you can do text-based large language models with. Specifically, it's great at data content summarization, data or content generation, as well as facilitating data retrieval optimization. The SoftBank CISO 2 weeks ago in Black Hat said that he has trained his very specific large language model autonomous agents to just convert natural language query to power queries across multiple different tool sets and data sets. So gone were the days did you need to know EQL and SQL and NoSQL, all the querying languages. You could actually facilitate a large language model agent in order to perform that translation across to power queries, a great way to facilitate data retrieval optimization. But large language models is semantic analysis. It is analysis, probabilistic deep learning on the natural language. So it will not facilitate log analysis or data analysis in its truest sense. There are other machine learning techniques that will be more optimal for that. So detection and response is not going to be the most accurate use case for generative AI. But as you can see, I actually think that all of these machine learning techniques could be used in tandem for different specific objectives. And you can start to achieve accuracy for a very good use case for what that machine learning technique is good for. Let's go in the middle. I'm biased. Darktrace sits in the middle. A whole bunch of other people sit in the middle. But we're talking behavioral analytics analysis, and we're talking about anomaly detection. One thing that I do like to point out here, one model is not sufficient. I have an intelligence community background. We have folks in the room who have a journalism background. You don't take the intelligence from one source and expect it to be ground truth. You want to corroborate it with other sources. So it's where a layered approach of machine learning with different types of machine learning models, looking at the data from different perspectives that can provide a collaborative and a combative approach to figuring out and driving accuracy. So in this case, it's incredibly good and efficient at using machine learning to augment advanced threat hunting from an anomaly behavior perspective. But one of its limitations is it requires so many different types of machine learning models to achieve accuracy. So you have to constantly be innovating and trying and testing new types of machine learning techniques. Okay, I always like to arm folks with questions. As you're adopting AI throughout your entire tech stack and security stack, including just being responsible on how to secure the use of AI, you need to ask questions, and all vendors need to be able to answer them. What data are you training on? How often are you training? Is it continuous? Is it static? Is it updated? And when I update, do I overwrite other capacities like reinforcement learning? How is my data integrity process? How accurate is the data training the models? How do you evaluate it? What's the testing, evaluation, validation, and verification process? How do you measure your accuracy? How do I know how the machine learning model came to its conclusion? Confidence elicitation, explainability, transparency. To be able to secure the use of AI and to be able to adopt it safely, we need to be able to answer these questions. I will answer the questions for Darktrace. I expect you to ask these questions of all your other vendors. How do we do it? We use an engine of like an unsupervised machine learning engine with dozens of different types of machine learning models because one is not sufficient. In order to set up a pattern of life to understand, to get to anomaly detection, you have to understand normality. So in order to understand normality, we need to be able to establish a pattern of life for every asset across your entire digital estate. May it be cloud, SaaS, IT, OT, endpoint, network. You need to understand all of your assets, how they interrelate with one another, how they operate on a day-to-day basis. Assets in one organization are going to look very different than assets in another organization. So a generic anomaly detection will do you nothing. In this case, we use 3 different types of clustering machine learning models. We figure out how assets act like other assets. We can set up a pattern of life with Bayesian learning. It allows us to take in historic information and current information and apply probabilistic modeling, which would be establishing a pattern of life. But it's continuously learning. It's not static. It doesn't need to be updated. Every deployment is finite and focused to that specific deployment because no 2 deployments look the same. Then we can start applying dozens of different types of anomaly detection models. Some are going to be more effective in your environment than others. In an OT environment, Gaussian mixture models or hidden Markov models might perform very well, but they were going to be way too noisy in a user environment. So we're able to then fine-tune autonomously through our unsupervised machine learning engine which models are performing well in your environment and reducing the weight of importance to the other models if that doesn't work in your environment. being able to isolate this across multiple different models, we have explainability and transparency. We understand how it came to its conclusion that this was anomalous for this specific asset or cluster group with a risk score, with a rare score, as well as with explainability as to why that model would cause that specific alert that needs humans to look at it. I can keep going into more, but I know I'm going to be set on time, but I do want to focus on that last bit. Our post-processing models, which is our model editor, is forward exposed to the end user with all of that explainability and transparency, but ultimately it comes down to control. You don't want to deploy AI in your environment, specifically your security operations center, and let it just run amok, and you have no idea what decisions it's going to make, what actions it's going to take. So the exposed for post-processing model editor allows you to identify what models cause certain alerts, with what explainability, set thresholds, what actions would you like to see as a result. It's the human out of the loop, but it's the human around the loop. You're totally controlling how to productize and operationalize the output of our unsupervised machine learning engine. So that's great. You have alerts. You have some accurate anomaly detection. How do you use it? We need to facilitate a faster detection and response in order to contain the incident. So we created cyber AI analysts. This is not generative AI. This is not a co-pilot. We've actually been doing this for 5 years. It's neural networks, unsupervised machine learning with supervised machine learning trained on Darktrace security investigations for 5 years. How does an analyst normally go through an investigation? They look at anomalous activity. They think, oh, is this C2? Is it a beacon? Is it lateral movement? Is it exfil? And it starts to perform an investigation of all the logs around those assets to see if it can confirm, refute, or modify that hypothesis. If it confirms it with a high enough threshold of risk or rare behavior, it will forward expose that with a natural language processing summary of the entire investigation. And our new release, we're going to go ahead and forward expose all of the investigations of all the low-level events across all the different domains. So even if it didn't meet a threshold for humans to have eyes on it, it's not a critical incident, we didn't need to do an autonomous response, we're going to forward expose the investigation that was already created so that humans can start to have more data-driven decision-making and understanding of how the models come to their output. And if you want to just go digging in the threat tray for some more advanced threat hunting. I'm going to end with this. The main things that I want you to take away with: explainability, transparency, control, and privacy as we adopt AI. For security, this specifically means having visibility across multiple different domains and understanding how your tools are coming to their conclusion. In this particular attack, it was a customer in March where we saw the attack fold out across SaaS or identity applications, email, and network. If you only had visibility, or if you have siloed point solutions without visibility across multiple different tools, may they be integrations or a platform, you don't see the full scope of the attack. But also, this one didn't move around that quickly, so probably not AI augmented. But in each one of these steps, you could have a surgical response that says, oh, well, we're going to allow, we locked the link in this one. The user unlocked it themselves, but you can double lock it. You can sever the connection to that one specific rare endpoint. You can stop the download of malware. You can actually lock out an account that's starting to look suspicious. Multiple, very surgical approaches could stop and mitigate this attack at every step. But we can't get to that autonomous response buying humans time if we don't have accountability, trust, transparency, and explainability. And that's really going to be what's on the responsibility of security and defenders is that we have to get our hands dirty with these tools and we have to understand how they're coming to their conclusion so that we can operationalize and productize this intelligence quickly, because our adversaries don't have the same threshold that we have in order to adopt it and use it safely. But we need to be able to use it to defend in kind. Thank you so much for having me today. I hope you guys have a great rest of the day. I will stay around if any, I think we have time for a few more questions. I can ask some questions now.
Un gran aplauso para Nicole. Thank you very much for your presentation. Amazing. Recuerden que tenemos el WhatsApp para que puedan hacer preguntas, también levantar la mano. Nicole, I have two questions for you. La primera, bueno, la voy a primero hacer en español. ¿Qué tan confiable o seguro es automatizar los procesos de respuesta o contención y de qué depende la confiabilidad de la respuesta automática? How reliable or safe is it to automate response or containment processes? And what does the reliability of the automatic response depend on?
Oh, that's a great question. I have the pleasure of working with our Senior Vice President of Incident Management. He and I were colleagues from 12 years ago, so we've gotten to work together a couple times. And that's probably his biggest pain point when he's helping customers through a crisis, is if we were not able to get to an autonomous response, the damage would probably more likely be more because humans are going to take more time to get in there and actually perform MTTD and MTTR. But how do we get to a point where we can actually look to adopt autonomous response? We roll out slow. Never turn it on automatically across your entire environment because you don't want to be very disruptive. Start with an environment that is not going to be critical infrastructure or OT at the start. And start to understand how the machine learning engine is coming into its conclusions to understand why the models are what we call breach or why the models are alerting. What are the thresholds for it? Get your hands dirty in the model editor. Start to understand how the engine's coming to its conclusion. Without that understanding, it's hard to operationalize that data. Once you get your hands dirty in there, you can start to build the trust with the output of the machine learning engine. And this is going to be the case with most products. Of course, you need transparency and explainability to get that trust. And then you have complete control. In our model editor, you have complete control as to when an autonomous response could kick in, what thresholds we call specific types of models, like our ransomware models per se. We have anomalous behavior mapped to the MITRE ATT&CK TTP framework. When we start to see any behavior that looks like ransomware, that should immediately take an autonomous response. You'll start to build out that trust with other models, other scenarios, and then you start to roll that out across the entire infrastructure. There will be some customers who will always say human confirmation mode. I don't feel comfortable. This is a critical infrastructure environment, whatever. And it is important to understand that those alerts need additional actions. It needs to email or WhatsApp the people who need to get eyes on it immediately so that you can reduce the amount of time of human eyes on the investigation so you can contain the incident. That's ultimately what we're trying to achieve with autonomous response. It is not full remediation. It is just severing it so that humans can get time to get eyes on it before it progresses throughout your environment. And then we need to move into what does a full, complete remediation look like? And ultimately, that's going to change with our threat vulnerability prioritization. And because we have a native knowledge of your assets across multiple domains, we can actually identify which assets could be the most damaging, exposed, vulnerable, or critical. And how do you prioritize that in an actual incident response and facilitating that through AI-generated playbooks? So yeah, I would say it's a scaled approach, and it's trust and safety in order to adopt and deploy.
Thank you. Tenemos otra pregunta que también nos ha llegado por WhatsApp. Dice, el factor humano es muy importante dentro de la ciberseguridad y puede generar un gran número de falsos positivos. ¿Cómo la inteligencia artificial maneja los falsos positivos dentro de la compañía Darktrace? I will say it in English, okay?
Wonderful.
The human factor is very important within cybersecurity and can generate a large number of false positives. So how does the artificial intelligence handle false positive within Darktrace?
Within Darktrace, okay. Because there are different false positives across different tool sets. In some tools, a false positive would be saying something's malicious when it was really benign. In our particular case, we're actually looking for rare or risk behavior for a specific asset that needs human eyes on it. So we're not saying something's malicious. We're saying that asset is now being used in a way that it wasn't being used ever before. This helps to identify lateral movement, 0 days, account takeovers, and so forth, because it's very anomalous behavior. All of a sudden, I'm uploading stuff to Dropbox at 11 p.m., and I've never done that before. Then you're worried about DLP or exfil. And so it's important to understand the models that are causing the alert, to read the investigations and the natural language processing in order to fine-tune those thresholds to what's most specific for your organization, to operationalize it. We have managed detection and response services. We also have incredible partners like iSecurity who do manage detection and response services and others. And that is a part of fine-tuning your deployment so that you're getting the exact objectives that you want out of that, and you're achieving that optimized workflow for your organization. Because what I consider to be a false positive across all tools is just a waste of time. And in the case of cyber AI analysts, that was one of our ways that we were trying to facilitate the reduction of a waste of time within the Security Operations Center. And I think that's kind of key and critical because me as a human, and I have been a defender in the SOC, I have done incident responses, nothing is worse than spending 2 hours on an investigation that ends up being nothing. But I'm also not going to investigate every alert. But our cyber AI analyst will. It will investigate every alert across your different domains. So it's going to do something that humans don't want to do and should never have to do. And it will present more data through its investigative process to the end users, to the SOC, so that they know, then they can figure out what their priorities are and what needs to take critical action. Our cyber AI analysts can take dozens, if not hundreds, of model alerts, come from hundreds of thousands of events, and dwindle it down to 2, 4, 6, 12 incidents that humans should probably have eyes on. It's to augment the human defender experience. It's not to replace it. It's to provide more intelligence across a bigger data corpus with better pattern analysis to facilitate that ML-augmented advanced threat hunting.
We have two in one questions are related. So what do you think that Chile has a cybersecurity law and a project to create a law on artificial intelligence, and what is the importance of regulation? And the other one is, it's important to have an artificial intelligence government, a set of multidisciplinary committee that approves IA projects as recommended by researchers, like the two. What do you think about?
I love it. I'm going to start with the second question because it's an easier one, and then I'll get to the first one. But it was actually Andrea who just actually notified me, but right before walking on stage, about the current legislation review within the country, which is wonderful. So I'm going to start with the second one because, like I said, I think it's an easier one. I've been in machine learning for 12, 13 years. But my degree in computer science engineering over 25 years ago, my focus was machine learning and mathematics. So it's been around for a while. I've been in data science. I know the good principles of data science and machine learning. And one of the hardest things that I had to deal with as a security practitioner as well as a data scientist in the last year and a half was to watch the irresponsible use of AI. And I say that because that is going to either break trust with end users. They're not going to productize it. They're not going to use it because it's not accurate. It's not data privacy preserving. It's biased. It could cause more harm. All of this comes down to typical data science principles that we've been using for decades. And so I think that's where a lot of people want to see the safe and responsible adoption of AI, may it be through regulation or may it be through accountability, is just to practice the tenets of data science that we already know. And that I think ultimately comes down to data integrity, transparency, explainability, privacy, data residency, data control of the operationalization of the data itself, as well as a good testing, evaluation, validation, and verification process. Also, which it was lovely to hear with some of the folks that I got to meet with today, is we also need to do, a part of that exhaustive testing of the use of machine learning is red teaming, is understanding how these models could potentially be manipulated. It's going through that exhaustive testing to ensure that we're constantly trying to safely adopt AI. And I loved hearing that from customers. We do have our own internal red team that's going after our engine for the same reason, because you can only get better when you have more data, more understanding of what potential vulnerabilities can be. From a regulatory perspective, I think we're seeing across multiple different countries right now that are looking at the organizations that have access to such big data corpuses, specifically more private information of institutions, obviously highly regulated industries like finance or healthcare, and just the responsible use of data. That's ultimately what it comes down to with machine learning and with artificial intelligence. It's the responsible use of data. And then you have to look at the ethical principles around that. How do I use this data to do no harm? For those of us in cybersecurity, we're sitting kind of pretty. We're not having to worry about the implications of the misuse of private identifying information. We're using machine learning to augment defense and response. But we're also the ones responsible for securing the use of AI, which I think is probably the hardest of our responsibilities in the community. And so I think you're going to see multiple different approaches from different countries. I can't say one's going to get it right, but I do like to see a lot of different countries really trying to achieve responsible use of AI, and I think most importantly, responsible handling of data.
Le damos un tremendo aplauso a Nicole Carignan por estar hoy con nosotros. Thank you for your response, for being here in Chile. It's your second time here in Chile.
It is my second time. It's a beautiful country. I appreciate you having me here. I love that our community is so collaborative and so global, and that I get the opportunity to have very diverse perspectives to your own problems and challenges that you're facing and what we're all trying to work together to achieve.
Yeah, thank you, and we will invite you again to stay more time. Muchas gracias a Nicole. Gracias por tu presentación. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank
Un aplauso muy grande nuevamente.